Let me ask you something. What does it take to kill an empire that's survived for 1,000 years? An empire that's been besieged dozens of times and never fallen? An empire that once ruled the Mediterranean world and has weathered every storm history could throw at it? You're about to find out. And I promise you, the answer involves the largest cannon ever built, ships dragged over mountains, and an emperor who died fighting in the streets like a common soldier, his purple boots the only thing identifying his corpse. This is the story of the fall of Constantinople. The year is 1453. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of Rome, has been reduced to a single city, Constantinople. For 53 days, 7,000 defenders will hold the greatest fortifications in the world against 80,000 Ottoman soldiers, hundreds of ships, and artillery that can punch through walls that have stood for a millennium. Emperor Constantine XI knows his city is doomed, but he refuses to surrender. He refuses to run. And on the final day, when Ottoman soldiers finally break through, he'll tear off his imperial regalia and die fighting alongside his men, choosing death over capture. This is the end of the Roman Empire, not in 476 AD like your textbook told you, but here, in 1453. In the streets of Constantinople. Before we dive into exactly how this happened, here's what I need from you. If this video shows you something you didn't know, if it gives you the real story behind one of history's most important moments, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what shocked you most, and subscribe because we're telling the stories that actually matter. No fluff, no simplified narratives, just the facts, the blood, and the consequences. That's all I'm asking. Now let's go back 570 years and watch the last day of Rome. Constantinople was not just a city, it was the city. For over 1,000 years, it had been the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of the Roman Empire that refused to die when the West collapsed. While Rome fell to barbarians in 476, Constantinople endured. It survived the Huns, the Persians, the Arabs, the Bulgars, the Rus, the Crusaders. It had been besieged more than 20 times. It had never fallen to assault. Never. The city sat on a peninsula jutting into the Sea of Marmara, with the Bosphorus Strait on one side and the Golden Horn Harbor on the other. It was one of the most defensible locations in the world, and it was protected by walls that were considered impregnable. The Theodosian walls, built in the 5th century, ran for 6 kilometers along the western land approach to the city. They consisted of 3 layers of defense, an outer wall, an inner wall twice as high, and a massive inner rampart. The outer wall was 8 meters tall. The inner wall was 12 meters tall and 5 meters thick. Between them was a 20-meter killing ground. Beyond the outer wall was a 20-meter wide moat. These walls had held for 1,000 years. Arab armies had broken against them. Bulgarian Khans had starved trying to breach them. Latin crusaders had only gotten through in 1204 through treachery and bribery, not assault. The walls were Constantinople's greatest asset. As long as they stood, the city could not fall. But by 1453, Constantinople was a shadow of its former glory. The Byzantine Empire, which had once controlled most of the Mediterranean, was reduced to the city itself and a few scattered territories in Greece. The population had shrunk from 500,000 at its peak to maybe 50,000. Entire neighborhoods were abandoned, fields and gardens growing inside the city walls where houses once stood. Economically, Constantinople was barely surviving, its trade dominated by Venetian and Genoese merchants. Militarily, it was hanging by a thread, and circling like wolves were the Ottoman Turks. They controlled everything around Constantinople. Anatolia to the east, the Balkans to the west. Ottoman territory completely surrounded the city. Byzantine emperors had survived for decades through diplomacy, tribute payments, and playing Ottoman factions against each other. But in 1451, everything changed. Sultan Murad II died, and his son Mehmed II took the throne. Mehmed was 19 years old, young, brilliant, ambitious, and obsessed with one goal, taking Constantinople. Western sources would later call him Mehmed the Conqueror, but in 1451 he was unproven and many in his court doubted him. His father had tried and failed to take Constantinople in 1422. Arab caliphs had tried for centuries and failed. Why would this boy succeed where so many others had fallen short? Because Mehmed had a plan, and it involved technology that hadn't existed when those walls were built. Mehmed's first move was to build a fortress. Rumeli Hisari, the fortress of Europe, constructed on the European side of the Bosphorus directly across from an older Ottoman fortress on the Asian side. Together, these two fortresses controlled the narrowest point of the Bosphorus. Any ship trying to pass would be caught in a crossfire. Mehmed built Rumeli Hisari in just 4 months, employing thousands of workers around the clock. When it was finished, in August 1452, he installed cannons and closed the strait. No ship could reach Constantinople from the Black Sea without Ottoman permission. Emperor Constantine XI watched this happening and knew what it meant. Mehmed wasn't preparing for negotiations, he was preparing for war. Constantine sent diplomatic protests. Mehmed ignored them. Constantine tried to rally support from Western Europe. The response was lukewarm at best. The Pope promised help, but only if the Byzantine Church accepted union with Rome, ending the Great Schism. Constantine, desperate, agreed. In December 1452, a ceremony was held in Hagia Sophia, officially uniting the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic churches. It was a disaster. The Byzantine population rioted. Many Orthodox Christians refused to accept the union, saying they'd rather see the Ottoman turban in Constantinople than the Latin mitre. The city tore itself apart over theology, while Ottoman armies massed at the gates. The promise of Western aid proved mostly empty. A few hundred Italian soldiers arrived. That was it. No armies, no fleets, no relief force. Constantinople would stand alone. Constantine had maybe 7,000 fighting men. About 5,000 were Byzantine Greeks, a mix of professional soldiers, armed citizens, and militia. About 2,000 were foreign volunteers, mostly Genoese and Venetian sailors and mercenaries. The most capable commander was Giovanni Giustiniani, a Genoese mercenary captain who arrived with 700 professional soldiers in January 1453. Constantine put him in command of defending the land walls, the most critical sector. Against them, Mehmed assembled the largest army the Ottomans had ever fielded. Estimates vary, but most sources put the Ottoman force at 80,000 to 100,000 men. About 60,000 were regular troops, Janissaries, the elite slave soldier infantry, Sipahis, professional cavalry, and provincial levies. Another 20,000 were irregulars, Bashibazouks, poorly armed but useful for filling trenches and overwhelming defenses through sheer numbers. Mehmed also assembled a fleet of over 120 ships to blockade the city from the sea, but Mehmed's secret weapon was artillery. Cannons had existed for decades, but they were small, unreliable, and not particularly effective against major fortifications. Mehmed changed that. He hired a Hungarian engineer named Urbana who tried to sell his services to Constantine first. Constantine couldn't afford him. Mehmed could, and Mehmed asked Urbana a simple question: can you build a cannon that can destroy the Theodosian walls? Urbana said yes. What he built was a monster. The largest cannon ever constructed up to that point in history. Ancient sources called it the Basilica. It was over 8 meters long, weighed nearly 17 tons, and could fire stone balls weighing 600 kilograms. It required 60 oxen and 400 men just to move it. The sound of its firing could be heard 15 kilometers away, and the ground shook when it discharged. It took 2 hours to reload, but when it hit, it could smash through any wall in the world. Urbana built several other large cannons as well, though none as massive as the Basilica. By the time Mehmed marched on Constantinople in early April 1453, he had over 70 artillery pieces, including a dozen truly massive siege guns. The age of impregnable walls was ending. Constantinople's defenders just didn't know it yet. On April 2, 1453, the Ottoman army appeared outside the land walls. The Byzantines watched from the ramparts as the horizon filled with soldiers. Tents covered the fields for kilometers. Banners flew in the spring breeze. The drums began to beat, a constant rhythm that would continue day and night for 53 days. Mehmed established his headquarters directly opposite the central section of the walls near the gate of St. Romanus. This was the Mesotician, the middle section of the walls and the most vulnerable point because the ground there was slightly elevated, making it easier for attackers. Mehmed positioned his artillery across from the weakest points in the walls. The basilica and the other super-heavy guns were aimed at the Mesotician. Smaller cannons targeted other sections, and on April 6, the bombardment began. The sound was like nothing anyone in Constantinople had ever heard. The roar of cannons echoed through the city. Stone cannonballs weighing hundreds of kilograms smashed into walls that had stood for 1,000 years. The first impacts were stunning. The walls shook, stones cracked, sections of the outer wall began to crumble. The Byzantines had prepared for sieges before. They had stockpiles of food, cisterns full of water, and experienced engineers, but they had never faced artillery on this scale. Every day, the cannons fired. The basilica, despite taking 2 hours to reload, fired 7 times a day. Each impact was devastating. The massive stone balls didn't just crack the walls, they pulverized them, reducing ancient stonework to rubble. Other cannons fired more frequently, pounding the same sections over and over. The strategy was simple: concentrate fire on specific points until sections of wall collapsed completely. The Byzantines responded with desperate ingenuity. Every night after the bombardment stopped, work crews rushed out to repair the damage. They couldn't rebuild the walls properly, there wasn't time or materials for that. Instead, they packed the breaches with earth, timber, barrels filled with dirt, anything to create a barrier. They hung leather hides, soaked in water over the walls to absorb cannon impacts. They built wooden palisades behind breached sections to create fallback positions. It was exhausting, terrifying work. The crews worked by torchlight, knowing that if the Ottomans attacked at night before repairs were finished, the city would fall. But every night they worked, and every morning the bombardment resumed, undoing much of what they'd accomplished. On April 9, Mehmed sent an envoy to Constantine offering terms. Surrender the city peacefully, and the population would be spared. Constantine could leave with his family and possessions, refuse, and every man, woman, and child would be enslaved or killed according to Islamic law regarding cities taken by storm. Constantine's advisors begged him to consider it. The walls were crumbling. No relief was coming, the city could not hold. Constantine refused. He sent a message back to Mehmed. Constantinople would never surrender. If Mehmed wanted the city, he'd have to take it over the bodies of its defenders. Mehmed received the message and smiled. He'd expected nothing less. He gave the order for the first major assault. On April 11, Ottoman forces attacked the land walls in force. Thousands of bashibazouks, irregular troops, charged the walls in waves. They carried ladders, grappling hooks, and shields. Their job wasn't necessarily to take the walls. It was to test the defenses, exhaust the defenders, and fill the moat with their bodies if necessary. The attack came at night, adding to the chaos and terror. The Byzantines met them with everything they had. Archers fired from the walls. Soldiers dropped stones, beams, Greek fire, anything heavy or flammable. The defenders pushed ladders away, poured boiling oil on climbers, and fought hand-to-hand when Ottomans reached the ramparts. The bashibazouks were brave but poorly trained and equipped. They died by the hundreds, but they kept coming. The assault lasted hours. The night was filled with screams, the clash of metal, the roar of flames. By dawn, the Ottomans withdrew, leaving hundreds of bodies piled against the walls and in the moat. The Byzantines had held, but barely. They'd taken casualties too, and every loss was irreplaceable. With only 7,000 defenders, every dead soldier meant another gap in the line. Mehmed wasn't discouraged. That assault was just a probe. Now he knew the defenders' strength, their positions, and their tactics, and he knew the bombardment was working. Sections of the outer wall were rubble. The moat in some places was filled with debris, making it passable. It was only a matter of time. The bombardment continued. Day after day, the cannons roared. The basilica fired at the Mesotitian, gradually reducing a 50-meter section of wall to rubble. Other cannons targeted gates, towers, and any section that looked weak. The psychological impact was immense. The constant noise, the ground shaking, the dust clouds, the knowledge that at any moment a cannonball could come crashing through a building, it wore down the defenders' morale. But Constantine and Giustiniani worked tirelessly to keep spirits up. Constantine walked the walls every day, talking to soldiers, thanking them, sharing their danger. He made sure everyone knew he wouldn't abandon them. Giustiniani organized the defenses with professional efficiency, rotating troops to give everyone rest, stockpiling weapons and supplies at critical points, and personally leading counterattacks when Ottomans got too close. On the water, the situation was slightly better for the Byzantines. Constantinople's navy was tiny, maybe 10 warships. But the entrance to the Golden Horn harbor was blocked by a massive chain stretched between two towers, one on the Constantinople side and one in the Genoese colony of Galata across the harbor. This chain, made of huge iron links, prevented Ottoman ships from entering the harbor. As long as it held, the northern sea walls facing the Golden Horn were safe and didn't need many defenders. On April 20, a naval battle erupted in the Sea of Marmara. 4 Genoese ships carrying supplies and reinforcements approached Constantinople from the south. Mehmed's fleet, over 100 ships, moved to intercept them. The Sultan personally rowed to the shore to watch, confident his overwhelming numbers would destroy the Christian ships. It didn't go as planned. The Genoese ships were larger, sturdier, and better crewed than the Ottoman galleys. When the Ottomans attacked, the Genoese fought back with devastating effectiveness. They rammed Ottoman galleys, sinking several. They used Greek fire, the Byzantine secret weapon, an incendiary mixture that burned even on water. Ottoman sailors who got too close were thrown back with grappling hooks and spears. The battle raged for hours as the wind died, leaving the Genoese ships becalmed just outside the harbor. Mehmed watched from shore, screaming orders, demanding his ships press the attack. Ottoman sailors died by the dozens, but they kept trying, and then the wind picked up. The Genoese ships caught the breeze and sailed into the Golden Horn under the protection of the chain. They survived. The supplies reached the city, and Mehmed, humiliated, reportedly rode his horse into the surf in rage, screaming at his admiral. Some sources say he considered executing the man, but was talked down by his advisors. The Byzantine defenders celebrated. It was the first real victory they'd had. Morale surged. Maybe, just maybe, they could hold out long enough for a relief force from Europe to arrive. Constantine sent messengers west again, begging for help. Surely the Pope, the Venetians, the Genoese, someone would send an army. They just had to hold on. But Mehmed was already solving the problem of the Golden Horn. If he couldn't break the chain, he'd go around it. He ordered his engineers to build a road from the Bosphorus, over the hills behind Galata, down to the Golden Horn behind the chain. Then he ordered his ships dragged overland. It sounds insane, and it was an enormous undertaking. But Mehmed had thousands of laborers and unlimited resources. His men cut trees, built a road of greased logs, and constructed cradles for the ships. On the night of April 22, under cover of darkness, Ottoman crews began hauling ships out of the Bosphorus and dragging them over the hill. Oxen pulled, men pushed. The ships rolled on logs, one agonizing meter at a time. By dawn on April 23, Byzantine defenders staring north toward the Golden Horn saw something impossible. Ottoman ships, inside the harbor, behind the chain. About 70 galleys had been dragged overland during the night, launched into the Golden Horn, and now threatened the entire northern side of the city. The Byzantines were stunned. How do you defend against an enemy who can move ships over mountains? Constantine immediately had to redeploy troops. Sections of the northern sea wall that had been lightly defended because the chain protected them now needed soldiers. But Constantine didn't have extra soldiers. Every man pulled from the land walls weakened the defense there. The Ottomans had effectively doubled the length of walls the Byzantines had to defend with the same number of men. The defenders tried to destroy the Ottoman ships in the harbor. On April 28, they launched a night raid. Greek sailors in small boats rowed quietly toward the Ottoman ships, carrying Greek fire and axes, planning to burn the fleet. But they were betrayed. Someone, possibly a Genoese merchant protecting his trade interests, tipped off the Ottomans. The raid was ambushed. Most of the Greek sailors were killed or captured. The prisoners were executed in sight of the city walls the next morning. Constantine and the defenders watched helplessly as their men were beheaded and impaled. Morale collapsed. The defenders were exhausted. They'd been fighting for nearly a month. The walls were crumbling. The Ottomans were inside the harbor. Casualties were mounting. Food was running low, and no help was coming. Some Genoese and Venetian sailors began talking about escaping on their ships before it was too late. Constantine learned of this and confronted them personally. He didn't order them to stay, he begged. He appealed to their honor, their faith, their humanity. Most stayed, some didn't. Maimed intensified the bombardment. The basilica had nearly destroyed the Mesotitian section. A breach over 30 meters wide had opened in the outer wall, filled with rubble and makeshift barriers. Giustiniani concentrated his best troops there, knowing that's where the final assault would come. The Ottomans also began mining operations, digging tunnels under the walls to collapse them from below. The Byzantines countered with their own tunnels, breaking into Ottoman mines and fighting savage underground battles in the darkness. On May 7, Mehmed ordered another major assault. This time, not just Bashibazouks, but regular troops and some Janissaries. The attack focused on the Mesotitian. Thousands of Ottomans charged the breach. The defenders met them with desperate ferocity. Giustiniani was everywhere, sword in hand, rallying his men, plugging gaps in the line. The fighting was hand-to-hand, brutal, claustrophobic. Men slipped on blood. The air was thick with smoke and screams. The Ottomans took the outer wall briefly. Byzantine defenders fell back to the inner wall and counterattacked, driving the Ottomans back through the breach. Bodies piled up in the killing ground between the walls. The assault lasted all day. By nightfall, the Ottomans withdrew again. They gained nothing. But the Byzantines had taken heavy casualties they couldn't replace. That night, Constantine called a council of his commanders. The situation was discussed openly. The walls wouldn't hold much longer. Supplies were critical. Ammunition for the few Byzantine cannons was nearly exhausted. The population was starving. Some advisors suggested Constantine escape while he could, preserve the imperial line, perhaps rally forces elsewhere and return. Constantine refused absolutely. He would not abandon his city or his people. If Constantinople fell, he would fall with it. Mehmed, meanwhile, was facing pressure from his own advisors. The siege had lasted far longer than expected. Casualties were high. The army's pay was running out. Some of his generals suggested negotiating, accepting tribute, and withdrawing. Mehmed refused. He de-staked his reputation on taking Constantinople. Failure would make him look weak and could spark rebellions. He announced one final, all-out assault. Every soldier, every ship, every weapon would attack simultaneously. If this failed, he'd withdraw, but it wouldn't fail. The attack was scheduled for May 29, 1453. Mehmed gave his troops 2 days to rest and prepare. He addressed the army personally, promising them 3 days of plunder if they took the city. According to Islamic law, a city taken by storm could be sacked for 3 days, with all plunder going to the soldiers. Gold, jewels, slaves, everything. The Ottoman soldiers cheered. They'd earned it. Inside Constantinople, the defenders prepared for the end. Everyone knew this was the final assault. On the evening of May 28, Constantine ordered a final religious service in Hagia Sophia. Orthodox and Catholic Christians prayed together, setting aside their theological disputes for one night. The great cathedral was packed. Constantine was there, kneeling, praying, weeping. He asked forgiveness from anyone he'd wronged. Then he returned to the walls. He gathered his commanders and gave a final speech. He thanked them for their service. He told them they were fighting for faith, for family, for civilization itself. He reminded them they were the last Romans. the heirs of an empire that had lasted 2,206 years from the founding of Rome to this moment. And if this was the end, they would end it with honor. Then Constantine walked the walls one last time, shaking hands with soldiers, calling them by name when he knew them, thanking them. Many wept as he passed. Just after midnight on May 29, 1453, the drums began. The Ottoman army moved forward in the darkness. The assault began with the bashibazouks, thousands of irregular troops charging the walls from all directions simultaneously. Their job was to exhaust the defenders and use up their ammunition. They came in waves, screaming, carrying ladders and torches. The Byzantines met them with arrows, stones, and burning oil. The bashibazouks died in heaps, but they kept coming, wave after wave, giving the defenders no rest. After 2 hours, Mehmed pulled the irregulars back and sent in the Anatolian regular troops. Better armed, better trained, they pressed the attacks harder. Fighting erupted all along the land walls and at the harbors. The defenders were already exhausted from fighting the first wave. Now they faced fresh troops. Men fought until their arms gave out, then kept fighting. The Anatolians reached the top of the walls in several places. Byzantine defenders threw them back. Then, just before dawn, Mehmed committed his elite, the Janissaries, the best infantry in the world, slave soldiers taken as boys, raised as Muslims, trained for war and nothing else. They were disciplined, fearless, and fanatically loyal. About 5,000 Janissaries advanced on the Mesotitian in perfect formation, drums beating, officers shouting cadence. They carried arquebuses, early firearms, along with swords and axes. They moved like a machine. The Byzantines were exhausted. They'd been fighting for hours. Ammunition was nearly gone. The breach in the Mesotitian was barely defended, just piles of rubble and wooden stakes. Giustiniani and his best troops held the line. The Janissaries hit them like a hammer. The fighting was apocalyptic. Janissaries fired arquebuses point-blank into Byzantine defenders. The Byzantines fought back with swords, spears, anything they had. Giustiniani was in the thick of it, shouting orders, swinging his sword. Then he was hit. A bullet or arrow, sources differ, struck him in the chest, punching through his armor. He staggered, bleeding heavily. His men begged him to fall back for medical treatment. Giustiniani, knowing his wound was probably mortal, agreed. His men carried him off the walls toward the harbor where a Genoese ship waited. His departure was catastrophic. The soldiers who'd been fighting under his command saw their commander carried away bleeding. Some thought he was fleeing. Panic spread. Discipline cracked. Men began pulling back from the breach. Constantine saw what was happening and rushed to the Mesotitian, trying to rally the troops, but it was too late. The Janissaries poured through the breach. Behind them came thousands of Ottoman soldiers. They overwhelmed the inner wall defenses and pushed into the city. Constantine saw the walls falling and knew it was over. According to legend, he turned to his remaining companions and said, "The city is fallen, and I am still alive." Then he tore off his purple imperial regalia, the only thing that marked him as emperor, drew his sword, and charged into the mass of Ottoman soldiers flooding through the breach. Nobody knows exactly how Constantine XI Palaiologos, last emperor of Rome, died. Some sources say he was cut down immediately in the press of soldiers. Others say he fought for some time before being overwhelmed. His body was never positively identified. Later, maimed soldiers found a body in imperial purple boots and assumed it was the emperor. They cut off the head and brought it to Mehmed. Whether it was actually Constantine or someone else who'd taken his boots, we'll never know. Constantine disappeared into the chaos, dying as he'd chosen, as a soldier defending his city. With the land walls breached and the emperor dead, the defense collapsed. Ottoman soldiers poured into Constantinople from multiple directions. Street fighting erupted throughout the city. Some Byzantine and Italian soldiers tried to hold choke points, fighting house to house. Most civilians fled to churches, hoping for sanctuary. The Ottomans showed no mercy. The city had resisted. Under Islamic law, it could be sacked. What followed was 3 days of horror. Ottoman soldiers rampaged through the city, killing, looting, enslaving. men were killed in the streets. Women and children were rounded up for the slave markets. Churches were stripped of their treasures, houses were ransacked. The death toll is impossible to know precisely. Estimates range from 4,000 to tens of thousands. Thousands more were enslaved. The Italian quarters near the harbor were hit hardest. Some Venetian and Genoese ships managed to escape with refugees. Most didn't. Mehmed himself entered the city in the afternoon of May 29. He rode through streets littered with bodies and debris. He went directly to Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, built by Emperor Justinian 900 years earlier. Mehmed dismounted, picked up a handful of dirt, and poured it over his head as an act of humility before God. Then he climbed the steps into Hagia Sophia. Inside, thousands of civilians had taken refuge, praying for deliverance. Ottoman soldiers had already broken in and were dragging people out to be enslaved. Mehmed stopped them. He declared that the looting of Hagia Sophia was over. Then he ordered an imam to climb to the pulpit and declare the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. Hagia Sophia, the architectural wonder of the Christian world, became a mosque. Mehmed would later order minarets built and Christian mosaics plastered over. Over the next few days, Mehmed toured his conquest. He was struck by how much of the city was empty, ruins and gardens where neighborhoods had once stood. The Byzantine Empire's slow decline was written in the empty spaces, but the bones of greatness remained. The walls, though breached, were still impressive. The harbors were magnificent. The location was perfect. Mehmed decided immediately that Constantinople would be his capital. He renamed it Istanbul, though the name Constantinople remained in use for centuries. He repopulated the city by forcing Ottoman subjects to move there and by encouraging Greek, Armenian, and Jewish communities to settle. He began reconstruction, repairing the walls, building mosques and palaces. Within decades, Istanbul would be one of the largest, richest cities in the world, but it was an Ottoman city now. The Roman city was dead. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves through Europe. For 1,000 years, Constantinople had been the eastern bulwark of Christendom. Now it was gone. The shock was profound. The Pope called for a new crusade to retake the city. Nobody came. Western kings sent letters of condolence and did nothing. Venice and Genoa, the merchant republics that had profited from trade with Byzantium, scrambled to negotiate new treaties with Mehmed to protect their commercial interests. Strategically, the fall opened the Balkans to Ottoman expansion. Without Constantinople blocking the way, Ottoman armies would push into Hungary, threaten Vienna, and dominate southeastern Europe for centuries. The Mediterranean became an Ottoman lake. Christian shipping was at the mercy of Ottoman naval power. The balance of power had shifted fundamentally. Culturally, the fall had enormous impact. Byzantine scholars fled west, bringing with them ancient Greek texts that had been preserved in Constantinople's libraries. These texts, many of them unknown in Western Europe, helped spark the Renaissance. The influx of Greek knowledge, Greek art, and Greek philosophy into Italy in the late 1450s contributed directly to the intellectual explosion that would transform Europe. There's also a darker legacy. The fall of Constantinople convinced many Europeans that the Ottoman Empire was an existential threat. This fear would drive centuries of conflict. It also contributed to European exploration. With the eastern trade routes controlled by the Ottomans, European merchants looked for alternatives. Portuguese and Spanish explorers pushed west and south, seeking routes to Asia that bypassed Ottoman territory. Within 40 years, Columbus would reach America. The fall of Constantinople helped set the age of exploration in motion. Let's analyze what actually happened at Constantinople. How did 80,000 Ottomans break walls that had held for 1,000 years against only 7,000 defenders? The answer is technology, time, and mathematics. Technology first. The cannon changed siege warfare forever. Before gunpowder artillery, walls like the Theodosian fortifications were essentially impregnable. Attackers could try to climb them, tunnel under them, or starve defenders out, but they couldn't knock them down. Cannons changed that. The basilica and Mehmed's other guns could reduce ancient stonework to rubble. The walls' thousand-year track record meant nothing against technology they weren't designed to withstand. Time. Mehmed could afford to take his time. He had supply lines, reinforcements, and effectively unlimited resources. The defenders didn't. Every day the siege lasted, the defenders got weaker, hungrier, more exhausted. Mehmed rotated fresh troops to the front. The defenders couldn't. Mathematics did the rest. Mathematics. 7,000 defenders trying to hold 6 kilometers of land walls plus sea walls is roughly 1 soldier per meter. That's not enough. When Mehmed attacked multiple sections simultaneously, the defenders had to stretch impossibly thin. When the Golden Horn was compromised, the defender-to-wall ratio got even worse. The Byzantines performed incredible feats holding out for 53 days, but the math was against them from the start. Leadership played a role too. Mehmed was young but competent, willing to innovate, and had the political strength to keep his army in the field despite setbacks. Constantine was brave and inspiring, but leading a doomed defense with no strategic options. Giustiniani was perhaps the most capable commander on either side, and his wounding at the critical moment likely decided the final assault's outcome. The Byzantine defenders deserve recognition. They fought with incredible courage against impossible odds. Outnumbered 10-1, bombarded by artillery, attacked from all sides, they held for 53 days. They inflicted thousands of casualties on the Ottomans. They made Mehmed pay for every meter. And when the end came, they didn't surrender. They died fighting. Constantine Xi's final stand has become legendary. An emperor who refused to flee, who died fighting alongside his men, choosing honor over survival. In Greek tradition, he became a folk hero. Legends arose that he hadn't really died, but had been turned to marble by an angel and would return one day to reclaim Constantinople. It's myth, of course, but myths form around people who embody something larger than themselves. Constantine embodied the last gasp of Rome, 2,200 years of history ending with one man's final, futile charge into enemy lines. The human cost was staggering: 4,000 to 10,000 civilians and soldiers dead. Thousands more enslaved, torn from their homes and families, sold in markets across the Ottoman Empire. Entire communities destroyed. Greek, Armenian, Italian families that had lived in Constantinople for generations were scattered to the winds. The survivors carried trauma that would echo through generations. For the soldiers on both sides, the siege was hell. Ottoman troops spent 53 days assaulting prepared fortifications, taking horrific casualties in wave after wave of attacks. Janissaries, professional soldiers, watched irregulars die by the thousands, softening up defenses they'd then have to breach. Byzantine defenders spent 53 days exhausted, terrified, watching their walls crumble, knowing no help was coming. Both sides paid in blood. There's a what-if question that haunts this story. What if Western Europe had sent help? Constantine begged for aid. The Pope promised it. Venice and Genoa had economic interests in Constantinople. If a fleet of 50 ships with 5,000 soldiers had arrived in April 1453, would the outcome have changed? Possibly. Fresh troops and supplies might have allowed the Byzantines to hold out longer. Maybe long enough for Mehmed's army to mutiny over unpaid wages or for political problems in Anatolia to force him to withdraw. But no help came. Europe watched Constantinople fall and did nothing. Partly because Western kingdoms were dealing with their own problems, England and France just ending the 100 Years' War. Partly because of distance and logistics. Partly because of religious divisions, Orthodox Catholic tensions making cooperation difficult. And partly because many Western rulers didn't grasp the strategic importance until it was too late. The fall of Constantinople marks a clear historical turning point. The end of the Middle Ages, some historians argue, the beginning of the early modern period. The moment when the Mediterranean world's center of gravity shifted from Christian Byzantium to Muslim Ottomans. It's one of those rare dates where you can point and say, everything changed. For the Orthodox Christian world, the loss was spiritual as well as political. Constantinople wasn't just the Byzantine capital. It was the center of Eastern Orthodoxy, the new Rome, the city of Constantine who'd made Christianity the Roman state religion. Its fall was apocalyptic in the literal sense. Many Orthodox Christians believed the end times were approaching. How could God allow the great Christian city to fall to Muslims? The Orthodox Church survived, of course. Moscow would later claim to be the third Rome, the heir to Constantinople's spiritual authority, but the center had been taken. Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, was a mosque. That wound took centuries to heal. In some ways, it hasn't healed yet. Mehmed's conquest made him a legend in the Islamic world. He'd achieved what Arab caliphs and earlier Ottoman sultans had failed to do. He'd conquered Constantinople, fulfilling a goal Muslims had sought since the 7th century. He became Mehmed the Conqueror, one of the greatest sultans in Ottoman history. He'd go on to expand the empire further, but nothing would match the glory of taking Constantinople. He was pragmatic in governing his new capital. He allowed Christians and Jews to continue living there under the millet system, religious communities governing themselves under Ottoman authority. He encouraged trade, rebuilt infrastructure, and turned Istanbul into a cosmopolitan center. But he never let anyone forget who ruled. The minarets he added to Hagia Sophia were visible from everywhere in the city, a permanent reminder that Rome had fallen and a new power had risen. Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, died of his wounds a few days after the siege. His body was taken back to Genoa and buried with honors. He'd fought brilliantly, arguably delaying the city's fall by weeks through his leadership. If he hadn't been wounded at the critical moment, maybe the final assault would have failed. We'll never know. The few defenders who survived and escaped carried the story west. Their accounts, combined with Ottoman sources, give us a detailed picture of the siege. We know the tactics, the key battles, the turning points. The Siege of Constantinople is one of the best documented military campaigns of the medieval period. There's something deeply tragic about Constantinople's fall. A city that had survived everything history threw at it for 1,000 years, finally overwhelmed by technological change, it couldn't adapt to fast enough. The walls that had protected the city for a millennium became obsolete in a matter of weeks under cannon fire. It's a reminder that past success doesn't guarantee future survival. The world changes, and those who can't change with it die. If you're still watching, I want to hear from you. Could Constantine have done anything differently to save the city? Was Mehmed's victory inevitable, or did it hinge on specific moments that could have gone differently? And do you think Western Europe should have done more to help? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's debate this the way it deserves. And if this story moved you, if you learned something, if you appreciate history told without the sanitization and oversimplification, hit that subscribe button. We are building a community that values real history. The kind that respects the people who lived it, the complexity of their choices, and the weight of their consequences. No fluff, no heroes and villains, just human beings facing impossible situations and the decisions they made. History is full of endings. Empires fall, cities burn, civilizations collapse. But those endings matter because they shape the world we live in. Constantinople's fall changed Europe, changed the Islamic world, changed global trade patterns and exploration. The ripples from May 29, 1453 are still echoing. Understanding what happened and why makes us smarter about power, technology, leadership, and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. Constantinople fell because its walls, once impregnable, met weapons designed to destroy them. Because its population, once 1 million strong, had dwindled to a few thousand. Because the empire it represented had been dying for centuries, and this was simply the last breath. Because no help came when it was needed most. And because Constantine XI, last emperor of Rome, chose to die with his city rather than live without it. That's the real story. Not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a complex tragedy of technological change, strategic miscalculation, political abandonment, and extraordinary courage in the face of inevitable defeat. The kind of story that stays with you, the kind that makes you think. Now you know what really happened when Rome finally died. Not in 476 AD, but here, in 1453, in the streets of Constantinople, with an emperor's sword in hand and Ottoman soldiers pouring through walls that had stood for a millennium. That's history. That's what we do here. And there's more coming. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.